Number 2.
In 2012, I was living in Rome for the summer. I was working as an undergraduate visiting researcher at the university. Every day, I would walk to and from work, which took about 35 to 40 minutes. One evening, I decided to take an alternate route that would shave off some time from my walk. Normally, I would have went through the main termini where all the people and shops are. This new route, however, had me cross the tracks farther down from the actual station. As I got closer to the tracks, I noticed the area began to look really rough, and there were a lot of homeless people hanging around. I power walked through it and just avoided eye contact with everyone, and eventually reached a small traffic tunnel. About halfway through, I felt someone come up behind me. He smelled terrible and was almost certainly foreign, as his Italian had a very, very thick accent. My Italian wasn't very good at that point, and I couldn't really understand what he was saying, so I just told him I wasn't really good at the language. The guy still wouldn't stop talking to me, even though he knew I couldn't understand what he was saying. I just assumed he really wanted money or something, but would go away on his own when he figured out I wasn't going to give him any. We reached the end of the tunnel, and I was doing my best to ignore him. I looked around and noticed the streets were abandoned, even though it was just after rush hour. I turned to him at some point and said, "Basta!" Or in other words, "Stop, that's enough." But he just kept following me and talking. I had begun to get nervous, but because he wasn't doing anything really threatening, I wasn't overly worried. When I reached a small stoplight, the guy's hand reached down and tugged at the bottom of my dress and sort of started to lift it. At this point, I felt threatened and swung my bag at him, which made him stagger a little. It was enough for me to take off in a bit of a sprint. However, I noticed when I looked back, the guy was still following me, just now at a small distance. I kept jogging until I finally reached a small grocery store and ran inside. The guy was right at my heels. At this point, he was directly behind my back, so close I could feel his body heat. He then started reaching for my elbow, like he was going to drag me out of the store. I shoved him off again and ran to two other girls who seemed to be around my age, asking if they spoke English. When they said yes, I motioned to the guy behind me and told them that the man had been following me since the train tracks. The girls' faces turned pretty serious at that point, and they started speaking rapidly to the guy in Italian. They then turned back to me and asked whether I knew him, and told me he was saying he was my boyfriend and that we had just been in a fight and I was lying. I told them I had never met him before and I had no idea who he was. I'd say the fact that he couldn't speak English and I couldn't speak much Italian made them certain there was little way the guy actually knew me. One of the girls then left to get the manager, who promptly threw the man out and told me he was watching on the monitors to make sure he went away. After the manager realized the man wouldn't go away, he called the police. The police arrived and I told them my story. By that point, the guy seemed to have finally left. I guess he was scared off when he saw the police coming. The manager then gave me a ride back to my apartment so that the guy couldn't follow me, just in case he was still lurking around. Luckily, that was the end of that, and I never walked past the train tracks again. I think I got lucky to have found that store, but it still taught me a very valuable lesson about being careful about the areas you venture into in new cities. Now I ask the locals for areas to avoid instead of wandering around foreign cities on my own.
Number 1.
In college, I wasn't the most outgoing or attractive,
and I usually stayed home while my roommates went out to live it up at bars and after parties. One night, they went out earlier than usual. The only reason I noticed is because when I ordered my routine dinner, deep dish pizza, extra cheese, the house that was buzzing loudly with ladies earlier looked like it had been abandoned. Clothes in the hall, makeup littering the bathroom counter, and chargers still plugged into the wall. Didn't notice anything about the pizza guy at all, besides that he wore his hat slightly to the left. We exchanged pleasantries, but I honestly can't remember anything significant about our conversation that would lead him on. Later that night, my roommates had come home, almost morning time honestly, and I was still awake watching my favorite Netflix series for the billionth time. My more than drunk roommate busted through the door, only to tease me by saying, "Annie, someone is here to see you." I absolutely never get visitors, and when I went to the door, they made him wait outside. All my roommates crowded to the stairs to get within better earshot. They didn't care that they weren't being sneaky. "Hey, what's up, Annie?" the guest asked. Now I wish I would have changed into something more presentable. It was a boy, and I recognized the way he wore his hat. "The pizza guy?" I didn't know what to say. I stood there in my hoodie and sweatpants with wild hair, probably looking more annoyed than surprised at this point. "I just got done with my shift and I thought we could hang out," he continues. "I just thought you were really pretty." I hear a symphony of ahs from the staircase. Confused and irritated now, I put my hand on the door preparing to close it. I'm not playing this game. This is weird, I thought. Without having any consideration for his feelings, I reply coldly, "I don't know you. It's 5 a.m. You shouldn't be here. Don't come back." I shut the door abruptly. My roommates chastised me for possibly dissing the only guy on campus who thinks you're pretty. He showed up at the house at 5 a.m., I argued, but they wouldn't hear it. The next day, he came by again, but I wasn't home. I didn't even know his name. Then the next day, Monday, he tried to catch me again, but I was in class. My roommates told me to give him a chance, to let him in and they would be there to chaperone. I guess they thought I was being coy, but I know I was only being sensible. Anyway, this is where my stalker started to get brave. He ambushed me on my porch one day and asked me 20 questions while I fumbled with my keys. I wasn't listening to his words when he grabbed my forearm and commanded, "Listen to me." Finally, a roommate got wise and apparently had been watching the encounter. She flung the door open and got in his face immediately. "Get out of here. You don't touch her like that." He laughed in her face in a very eerie fashion. His eyes didn't blink, and his demeanor was aggressive as he took a step forward. "I'm calling the cops. Fuck you," said my roommate. He laughed even harder and left at a slow pace, all the while laughing menacingly. I called the pizza place and informed them that one of their delivery boys was victimizing me. When they asked for a description, all I had to say was the hat detail, and the person on the other line let out a heavy sigh. He explained that they'd had issues with him before and were considering terminating his employment because of the complaints they had received recently. The manager assured me that he was harmless and that he would stop if we ignored the visits altogether. He didn't show up for about a week, but then one of my roommates phoned campus police after she saw him walking around the perimeter of our house. I came home from class that day to see the flickering lights, and they promised to do surveillance. Bullshit. That night was a weekend, and although my friends offered to stay in, I assured them that I would be fine. It was 11 p.m. when I heard it. One girl, who didn't go out that night, screamed bloody murder from the kitchen. I grabbed a hammer from my utility drawer, used to hang pictures and such, and sprinted downstairs. She was hiding under our small table. I hadn't heard the glass shatter, but he was reaching through the kitchen door window fiddling for the door handle. Without thinking, I ran up and swung at his hand with the hammer. He was too fast. He reached for me to grab at my clothes. I swung and landed a solid blow to his face. He was boggled for a moment, and I swung again, but instead from the side I brought the hammer down on his head. His body went limp. We called 911, not bothering with campus police, and when they arrived, we were in the doorway watching a pool of blood collect on the floor from his busted mouth. To this day, I cannot and will not give out my home address for any reason. I don't let men take me on dates. I meet them in public, and above all, I do not feel any guilt for turning someone who outrightly makes me uncomfortable or gives me a bad feeling. I'm glad I followed my instincts and never let the guy into my life in any way. It could have gotten a lot more violent for myself and my roommates. We found out from the cops that he had a few priors that were pled down and he wasn't in any way innocent. Ladies, think twice before you give out your info. Hey guys, I really hope you enjoyed the video. I want to give a big thank you to MaddMike for helping me out on it. He's been one of my favorite narrators for a long time, and it was amazing to work with him. So on the very slim chance that you're not familiar with him, head on over to his channel for part 2 of our collaboration. There will be a link in the description and likely an annotation on screen. Make sure you stay and check out all of his great content over there too. As always guys, don't forget to subscribe if you haven't, share with friends, and I'll see you in the next one.